So I'm Jeanette, and this is Dunya, Diane McPherson, and she's my teacher. And the talk tonight is exploring rich realms. And I was just reading in her second book, which is, the second title is
Sojourn the Inner Heaven.
Sojourn the Inner Heaven, about dance meditation. About how she learned patience and observational skills from her scientist father. That's one of the stories in there. And I'm pulling this from because I wanted to tell the scientists who ran the Exploring the Nature of Reality series that this could really dovetail on that. Because Dunya is an explorer, I would say. She's an explorer of rich realms, the title of her talk tonight. And I kept getting it wrong more recently. I kept thinking of it as exploring hidden realms. Because you can see the ones that out here, well, even the forest ones are kind of hidden, right? They're interior. Not all of her work is interior. Not all of her landscapes are interior like that. But that's the immediately obvious rich and hidden, some of the immediately obvious hidden and rich realms that she's explored in this show called The Forest Temple Paintings. And she first created those canvases, and by the way, she could correct everything I say after this. It's very so she created the Forest Temple Paintings because she wanted to live among, or in that realm, and we get to borrow them for a while and live in that realm, and people have been really enjoying it. But she's also explored inner realms. Sometimes it was facing physical pain, and then beyond that, it was through dedication to a regular practice of movement and meditation, exploring these rich hidden realms. And then coming back to tell other people about it and to lead them in, to add dimensions to their lives. So that's how I met her. Originally from Woods Hole, daughter of a scientist, and a mother, and that I don't, not giving enough credit to right now, but, and from here, she went to North Carolina School of the Arts, I mean, an honor, and then she became a Juilliard trained ballerina in New York City. And so she knows some, already you can tell, even that young, she knew about some various states of reality as a performer and, in the art scene in New York and all that, right? An explorer. And then, through a friend, she learned about Sufi meditation, and she became an expert in that realm, and then created and is still teaching dance meditation. So that's how I met her, when she'd come back to the Cape from New York City, visiting and offering a workshop. And what appealed to me was, I remember the first time I saw a postcard at a coffee shop that appealed to me, and it was an image of her doing a simple movement, and it said, you don't have to learn steps to do that. So I was sold on that. Dance meditation leaves behind the pressure of dance as a performance. Sometimes we even use blindfolds, but very likely where our eyes are low or even closed. And it supports spiritual and physical healing. And I know I'm going off topic, but I'm now going into my promo persona. because on Saturday, you get to try dance meditation for an hour and a half, starting at 10 o'clock. And it supports spiritual and physical healing. So we've gone dance to meditation, and then she's also a writer. She's written and published 2 books about dance meditation. So now she still teaches dance meditation, and people who have traveled across the country to go to her workshops in Texas and California, et cetera, they now still follow her online when she offers dance meditation online. And they can go to her retreat center, Raven Rock, in New Mexico. So more recently, she's moved to the challenge of fine arts painting. She first learned, don't worry, the next page is much shorter. She learned about painting from her grandmother, which I think is such a wonderful connection. And she's been very generous in letting others of us in. I've been and learn the process that she's learning. So she's been making some made short videos, for example, of how you make a value sketch first and why that's important. And it's been so fun. So each time she's made an exploration, she's helped other people find out about it. And finally on her name, she was originally Diane, and she was given the name Dunya from her Sufi teacher, and it means the world. So I hope, I know that our realities and our worlds will connect with Dunya's, and it's going to be a great, multiple directional conversation, right? Well, thank you.
I might sit, I might stand, we'll see what comes. So I'm very familiar with talking about dance because the majority of my career as an artist was in dance. From the time I was, 18, and it's still unfolding, but professionally performing and teaching for just so many years. So of course you have to learn to talk about it and think about it. And then painting, in a way, especially this recent period of time when I just dove into it, was a way to not talk, not think, I have to think, but not in the same way. There's a way of thinking. Each art form has its own way of thinking. You have to use your mind really differently, and some other part of your being where your mind opens up. So I thought I would spend a little time, though, just talking about the first decision in making a piece in 2 different art forms. And I'm actually going to use painting and choreography, because in a way, being a dancer is not necessarily being a choreographer, but every choreographer has to be a dancer. And you have to know the vocabulary, you have to be able to do some steps. You have to have training, and then from that you design dances, usually. That's the order of it. So I'm going to speak of myself as a choreographer, which I also did professionally for quite a long time when there was plenty of funding. The National Endowment was funded until a certain period of time, and then it got, and many small choreographers, in other words, not the major 10 or 12, but many of us in New York, we just lost our funding, which is fine. It's the way of the progression of things. But I had a good 10, 15 years of being a choreographer and getting paid for what I did. So I began learning how to choreograph dances at Juilliard. I studied with composition teachers. And I don't know if this is of interest, but I'll bring it forward to you and see if you can find it so. That the first decision you make when you're a choreographer is how many people Is it a solo? Is it a duet? Is it a trio? Very simple. And I'm making the assumption that all these things are performances that you're going to do in a space that's like a box. Right? And then you're going to maneuver those figures. Say it's 3. 3 is always a good number. 4 is quite difficult. It stagnates. 2 is also kind of difficult. It stagnates. 1's fine, a little dull. 3 is great. Because when you have 3 people, you can have 3 people doing the same movement all at the same time in unison, or you can have a duet and a solo doing a counterpoint, or you can have 3 different voices doing 3 different things. You know, it offers right away a lot of variation. So as a choreographer, that would be the first thing I would think about: how many people? The first decision as a painter is how big is the canvas and what direction does it go? And you know, I really didn't think about that when I was diving into painting recently, because immediately there's value studies, and then like, oh, you do the sketch, and then you make a value study, and then you start, you know, like the first layer of the colors, and you know, there would be, but the actual first decision is it going to be this way? Is it going to be this way? Is it going to be long and narrow? Is it going to be like so many of these? And I want to say thank you to Annie Dean, because I had done 3 of them or something, and you came over to tea, and she said, you should do 20, and then show. You don't remember this. I was asking you to do. Yeah. Well, I didn't get to 20, but I got to, you know, more than 3. And the tall, thin thing was really the best decision, because for some reason everything that was wanting to come out really enjoyed occupying that dimension, that space. And maybe you say, yeah, the trees, I don't even know if it was trees that I wanted to do, but they were the right thing for that shape. You know, so it kind of led me forth. The next thing you would do as a choreographer is you make some themes. Usually you have an A theme, a B theme, and sometimes a C theme. Just like music, you know, there's the A music and the B music and the C music. And then you make a bunch, this is before the dancers come in, then you make a bunch of variations. You make A variations, you know, like A1, A2, A3, so versions of A. And when the dancers come in, you teach them all that material, so that's the first 3 rehearsals, teaching them all the material. And all those movements have usually come from inside your body, so that's useful to be able to dance. So you have something to pull out of your body. Whereas if you're a ballet choreographer, it's just vocabulary that has been invented for centuries, and they just manipulate the same steps over and over again. But modern dance, you get to invent it out of your body. Dancers come in, teach them the material, and then you start to construct a piece. Like, okay, I'm not going to really start with the original theme of A. I'm going to start with the variation. I'm going to have 2 dancers coming in from the left doing the variation 2, and then I'll come in, have one other dancer stand in the front and do the original theme. You know, you can. It's just puzzles from then on in, all the way through to the end, and it's how you put those puzzles together with the music. Painting, the next step would be making a decision about how I'm going to occupy that canvas. You know, either looking at a scene as a map or a photo as a map, and that's how I'm treating. I use paint from photos a lot, but it's really a map. It's not really, I'm not trying to do a realistic rendition, as you can see. I made myself do some classical training and make realism, but I really wanted to do exactly what I'm doing, which is impressionism that sometimes verges on abstraction. I just felt that had the most dynamism for me. So I would just find something that has enough of a structure that I could then get a sketch, get a value study, and then it starts. Then it starts. But I think thinking about these two little ways of being an artist, because every art form will have something like this. It'll have its own preliminaries, it'll have its own first steps, it'll have its own, when you're gonna make a piece of any art, it'll always have a technical structure and way of progressing. I think for me, all my art experience of making dances, or making paintings, especially writing books, it isn't to express myself, it's to discover what's going on. Like, to me, I feel like essentially I'm a detective trying to find out what happened back then. So the topic really underneath everything is sort of what is the genesis of an idea, and I don't really discover the genesis until I've manifested a lot, and the manifestations, say these paintings, Forest Temple series, I want to talk a little bit about what the genesis of that is, because it was around 1980. I was in Australia. I was the chair of a dance department of basically what's the Juilliard of Australia. And I was the modern dance chair, and taught so much. I was teaching so much I could hardly see straight, and I was 29 years old. I mean, I had a lot of energy, but they worked me to bone. And at some point, I just really needed to do something that wasn't teaching. And one of my lovely students said, "Oh, you have to come with me. There's this wonderful Bharatanatyam teacher, and we just have to go. The classes are in the evenings, so it'll be after work." So I said, okay. I went to his concert, and if you've ever seen classical Indian dance, have ever people seen it in here? There are all these, it's narrative dance, there's stories of Shiva and, the gods, and they're pieces of the Hindu religion, basically. So there are all these characters in the headline. The gestures are actually like a miming of the story, and then it has a lot of footwork underneath it too. Incredible concert. It was the first time I'd ever seen this movement where the dancer does, where they lift their stomach up and their eyes go. I'd never seen this movement in my life, and I was like, what is that? Something was vibrating in me. It was like a thing, a new thing. So after the concert, we went to the class the next week or the week after, and it was in the evening, and I don't know what the lighting was, because we walked, she picked me up and took me, I didn't have a car, to someplace, I didn't know where I was, and got out, and it was foresty, and there was a house that was lit, and then you walked through this sort of curving path through all this rather lush, semi-tropical fauna and flora, it was a studio behind in the back that was all glass walled, and it was sitting in the middle of this garden of these huge, tall, like bird of paradise type of flowers. And that's where the class was. And he didn't teach it, he took it. His teacher was this old woman, and she, dictated, and he would demonstrate some of the things. Anyway, it impacted me tremendously. I thought, I can't believe this experience of learning dance inside a garden. Because I'd just been in funky dance studios my whole life, and especially like the Juilliard in New York City, it's always up in a loft and creaky, smelly, black, dirty old buildings, and I love them. Anyway, but this was something different. So I'm out in the garden here in Woods Hole. We're struggling with the forest, as everybody has woods here, with all these vines that grow, and bittersweet, you have to clear that stuff out. If you want your trees to grow, you have to try and get rid of some of the heavy-duty stuff that grows in the underbrush. And as we would clear the junk, and I was sitting in the woods, I started to have such this feeling of how it is a temple, and that Genesis came back, that moment of the studio in Australia. And I don't know what it was, I just started calling the forest my temple. And so I did one painting, tall. The very first one was my favorite one still. I think it's this one. And they all wanted to start coming out. That was just it. And then I realized once I hung one on the wall that I wanted to live in this forest temple. I wanted this temple to be inside my house. I wanted my house to be a temple, and I wanted it to be a temple this way. I didn't want to put up little pujas, and it's not me, I'm a New Englander, you know? I still like a New Englandy house. But this was crossing over into a way that it felt so great to me. And so the reason to mention the story about Australia is that I knew something was going on, other than I was just learning a new dance form or getting away from teaching at school. And I had no idea until I painted this, what it became a body of work, how much that seed had meant. You know, a seed had been planted. So these days when I'm teaching meditation, I'm usually teaching little short things, you know, an hour and a half, once every 6 months in Berkeley, Mass, or Boston or somewhere. It seems like, wow, this is not like a daily practice for anybody here. You know, somebody's coming in and having a little bit of an experience. Is this anything, you know? Because I had sort of had a heavy-duty practice where I went and lived in a retreat center and did 8 hours of practice every day for months. Will they get the energy? Will it mean anything? As if I have to do all this stuff. It's not my business to do anything for anybody else in life, but I just wonder, you know. But then I realized how seeds are, you know. Seeds are, they just sit in there until they're ready, until their time has come. And that maybe something happens in the movement, you know, something of the Sufi lineage comes through, and it means something to somebody whenever it does, whenever it can. And the whole picture, I don't know what the whole picture is. Yeah. I think that is, for me, why, you know, I feel very fortunate to have been an artist my whole life. I really do. It's just, I've always had this way that I could therefore go inside and let something open up, you know. And that's what the forms are, whatever the form is that I choose to do. I mean, it is nice to learn a new form and become, you know, immerse myself in painting, because I kind of reached the outer limits of dancing, the outer limits, not the inner limits. I don't know if there are inner limits, but the outer part. And then, you know, as I'm getting older, and I had to do dance first because you had to be young to perform. And now I'm, you know, I have to be very careful with the instrument, and that even affects inwardness, inward-facing movement. But there's still an infinity in there, and an infinite unfolding. So it's just nice to have a different form. It's also nice not to use my body. Yeah. It's so nice to have it sit there. I had a boyfriend when I was at Juilliard who was a violist, and I was so jealous that when he got done playing, he'd put the viola in a case and go out and have a beer. I couldn't do that. I could not do that. So it's nice not to have an art form that is, and it's not as heavy as writing. Writing is the hardest. Of all my art forms, that's the hardest one. And music was my first art form because I had a wonderful teacher in my aunt here in Woods Hole. But I realized that I didn't want to do fine motor control in front of an audience. It's just too hard. You get slightly nervous, and then suddenly, you know, all of this goes down the tube. So dancing was a lot better. But paint, and so maybe they're just getting farther and farther away from the instrument. Now I can do this. And it doesn't matter. So I think that's enough for me to say. I'm not talking particularly about this show, but here we have time, so.
one thing to another, moving through time and space. Painting exists as a frozen emotion or a frozen experience, but it's there on the canvas. Very different. You can go back to it and find something new, but it's still there as something that's frozen. Very different. How do you, is there something that complements that, or is it, how do you square the two? What do you?
Well, maybe that's it, they complement each other. But yeah, dancing is, you know, they say the elements of dance are space, time, and design. I don't really know what the elements of painting are. I would assume that they're, I don't know, design, values, color, something like that. Painting, that's what, I don't really know if that's the elements, but yeah, that thing of immediate, the piece exists in time and it's disappearing as you're doing it as a dancer. Yeah, that is something that's, you have to come to grips with. I mean, you know, we have video now, so there's this sense that, and I wonder how that is for young dancers, you know, that they always have this instrument of being able to catch themselves and fix themselves and see themselves again, you know, in time, where during my generation you just didn't have it. It was very complicated to get a video back then. And so you had to accept the fact that it was evanescent. And maybe that was, you know, part of my spiritual, you know, also when you're young you think, I'll be living forever and I'll do this forever. Yeah, I thought, oh, I'm gonna be 80 and dancing, you know, like, I'm 71 or 2 or whatever it is, I'm definitely not gonna be doing what I was doing back then. But anyway, and painting is nice that it's slow and spacious. It's there. I really do like that quality. It, you know, it's two-dimensional. It's strange that way. You know, I guess I could be a sculptor and then I'd have to.
Well, that would be my follow-up. You know, does a dancer move to sculpture? More spatial?
Or sculpture gardens or something, yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you find you've had concepts that kind of grab your mind. Let's say something like ripples, which you then go to the different media to get that concept out, or it all begins anew each time you move from painting to dancing.
You know, I think I'm not a conceptual person. That's a really great question though, because there are a lot of people who are, you know, they would have a sense of concept. I don't know, I have some kind of impulse in me that's not conceptual, and a concept emerges later. Oh, this is what I'm working on. In other words, it'll come up to my consciousness, but it'll sort of initiate somehow as an impulse or an unconscious sense of something to go do it. And even though I think learning the skill set of a different art form is a very cerebral process, you know, you definitely learn technical material in order to be able to do what you want to do. I just always see those things as ways to not be frustrated. Because if I'm following an impulse and I feel this sense that this thing wants to happen, and then I get to a technical place where I can't do it, then I'm frustrated. So it's great to have technical skill. You know? Like, say I want, like with these, this is a perfect example. Most of them are sort of close in. You're standing like right in the forest. The forest is way over there, right? But there still has to be this thing for it to work. There has to be a sense of depth. If I didn't have the technical skill to create depth, I would be frustrated, you know? But because of the realism, I know how to create something so that it looks close or far by manipulating the paint one way or another. So, yeah, I don't know that I really, I mean, with painting, the only conceptual thing I have is seeing other people's work and saying, wow, I would love to be able to do that. I wonder how I can do that, you know. That's sort of like a cerebral conceptual idea. but soon what happens is if I get to a canvas and then I start trying to copy that, I either have to make a decision whether I'm gonna copy them in order to learn it, or if whatever that impulse was that I so loved is enough for me to let go of how they did it and find out how I'm gonna figure it out, how I'm gonna struggle. It'll be a struggle usually.
So say when you're doing choreography, aren't you sort of feeling the same way? Is it kind of conceptual? Is that kind of,
Maybe I need to know what you mean by conceptual, that would be helpful.
okay. When you're thinking about choreography and then something, with the dancers, you sort of think the same way when you're doing your artwork, it's hard to explain. You're seeing something, you're feeling something in their movement and their steps. Sort of tied together.
Yeah, and it is an interesting question. Where does a piece of art come from? I mean, I think that's really what we're asking. You know, where does it come from? Does it come from an idea? Are you moved, by, like, I'm not the kind of person who is moved by political rage, for instance, but there were lots of artists who were, that was the genesis of their work, they had to get their, outrage out. Oh my God, it's a great exhibit at the MFA recently. Who was that amazing black artist who did this? Oh, he did, yeah, I can't remember that. But anyway, when I walked in there, I said, now that was like an outrage that actually really talked right into my gut versus head, And maybe that's important for me, is that I don't really want to see somebody's head on the canvas, and their mind, their thinking, their calculation that's from here up. I would want to see the whole connection. But that's just what I'm drawn to. For me, it usually starts in here somewhere, and then I have to figure things out. I struggle because I need to make it work, because it's not working enough yet for one reason or another. It's like, oh God, that thing slid too far to the side, now the canvas is all unbalanced, now I have to bring it in the middle and I do that, and the value is too light now if I deepen it, but then that's too far, it's really this constant tensile experience within this frame, to make it settle, because there is a moment where the painting settles, but there's a long space between the beginning excitement and the settling, where it struggles inside itself.
Can I ask
Yeah.
about the process for making these pictures, for example, out there? I think if I understood right, you were in the woods, you were in and made these pictures, or started them. Is that right?
Well, photographs. I took photographs in the woods. I didn't do plein air. I might have done a plein air sketch for one of them. Sometimes I do.
Okay.
I like plein air. I would do something tiny. I would do a quick, small one, because it all has to happen fast, plein air, usually. No, I would never sit in the woods like with any canvas, because I have to something controlled. The light has to be controlled so I can see what I'm doing. And outdoors is so dynamic, but it's uncontrolled completely. I don't know. I know that there are, I'm sure, some experienced plein air painters in here, but I keep doing it, but it's hard. It's different. So, yeah.
In dance, you're responding to the music in some fashion. In painting, you're kind of responding to your internal music in some fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a connection there. There is a freedom, perhaps, in painting that might not exist in dance, even though it's static. Painting, that is, because now you're the composer.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not the choreographer. You're the composer. You're setting the music. You're putting it down. In dance, you're responding to the composer in some way, counterpoint, however, you're still responding to the music. Of course, there is some dance with no music, I understand that, I'm okay with that too. But dance is essentially a response to the music in some fashion. I mean, serenade is still responding to, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even though it's abstract, even Balanchine is you know, new classical, you know, it's still a response to the music. But painting is, you're the composer. There's no music. There's only what you've put out there.
Well, there's a lot of freedom. There are two thoughts that I'm hearing in here. One is that with painting, you don't have to deal with dancers, for one thing.
Yeah.
Or
You don't have to
anybody
worry
else.
how many dancers you have.
You don't have to deal with anybody else, whereas with, you know, dance is a social business, even performance dance. You know, there's always people in the studio doing things together. And, well, one of the many sessions in composition class at Juilliard was that you were to make a dance with one piece of music, these are little studies, you know, a minute long or something, and then take that music away and put a different piece underneath it. So the training point was to stop responding to the music, but to use it as a soundtrack and to understand it as such. And the reason for that is otherwise you're following it around like a little child following their parent or a little dog, you know. And the idea was to have the dance stand in equal capacity to the music. So you had to be able to stop being driven by it and find a relationship. So that was just a side point to it. But you're right. If you're using music, it's always there and you've got to deal with it one way or another. You know?
Or in some cases, you're completing the music.
Oh, whatever.
You
But
know,
there are a lot
it's
of dancers that
fractional.
don't like that. I'm not sure why this is doing this. That don't like that idea that you are, like for instance, this is a Juilliard trained choreographer speaking here. You never want to use a really good piece of music because it will always be stronger than anything you can make. So you want to do like the next level that. You're using a Baroque composer, you don't use Bach. You use somebody like, you know, Scarlatti or something. So, you know, good composer, nothing wrong, but, you know.
If the music is too complete, there's no room for the two.
That's it, exactly. That's it.
Wow.
That's exactly right. You want there to be space for the dance. The only person who breaks that rule constantly is Mark Morris. And he's very good at it. I mean, I would even say Balanchine is a little.
He did many pieces with, you know, Bach and things like that.
I know that. In a way, the Bach is stronger
Right.
than Balanchine, I
You
think.
can still do it, but.
And he was breaking the mold, so we'll give him plenty of leeway. So, painting and, yeah, I think there's I find a lot of pleasure in the fact that I'm free in the studio, just me and the canvas.
You're the composer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious what other thoughts you're having, Phil, as maybe as an architect. Are you a little envious of a painter
No,
as
you
an
see,
architect? What kind of constraints do you
It's
have?
interesting, that's why I love dance, because architecture is very close to dance and sculpture. It's movement, it is frozen music. All right, and that's why I like dance, because it's structural. It has a structure to it, it moves in space and time. Architecture is like frozen music. There's repeat, there's form, there's space. Things move in time as you move through a building. It's exposed to you, it's open to you. The spaces become revealed. And so it's like dance and sculpture kind of put together with practicality
It's spatial.
and space,
Yeah.
all answering to a program, all answering to a functional program that you have to fulfill for a client. That's the practical side. But what it is frozen music, frozen spatial dance, all kind of moved into one package. So anyway, to answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really great observation about architecture.
Okay, this is really out there, so just tell me it's too far out there, but it's just a thought. Well, either just a thought, or maybe there'll be somebody else have an adjacent idea. But I guess I'm thinking about this because I spend time trying to get people into this building, and I'm just remembering that I think this is the 4th time you've been in this building, and might have been the first time you performed here. And I don't know how the arrangement was. It's funny, I feel like there was a big platform, but there wasn't somehow.
No, there was a platform that went across all the way.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
There was
Oh,
a
okay.
a
platform.
little stage.
That platform became unsafe and we had to take it out.
oh, okay,
So yes, you're right.
okay. And so you know, you might have a memory of what it was like to perform in this space. And then another time you came was for this solstice.
Boy, you really remember how many times I've
Well,
been in this building.
Well, I love you, and I see you here, but I also I really like the solstice ones, because there's so much,
I was here for that.
greenery. Well, we've done it several times, but this particular one, there weren't too many words, and there was a lot of greenery, and candles, and so on.
So it was a winter solstice.
It was.
Yeah, winter solstice, and then you came to a service recently, and then now I'm learning from how you use the space, and I just think, oh, God, that's some better lighting for this kind of thing. But you created this space, and you created a way to record it. It just and you had to be really flexible because we didn't know how many people would come, and so on and so forth. And it just worked out, so well. So that was almost a little bit of a choreography of that, and so on. And I guess maybe it's a separate question. I want to know, what brought you to this space as an architect? You decided you kind of made this a little bit of a home, So this space is like a chalice. The design is that these two wings are like the bottom of the chalice, and we're in the flame of the chalice, actually. So I can just leave it at that, unless anybody else has some related something around it.
Well, there's 2 ways to do everything. It can be formalistic, and you just describe it. or it can be
Formalistic?
abstract. Formalistic in the sense that you've formed the space to represent something, representation. Formalistic. Then you fit your program into it. The other way is to let the program speak for itself,
Yeah.
and there is no formalism therefore. So it's just different ways of approaching it. There's other ways too, but to answer your point, that's what how this space was designed. It was designed on a formalistic concept, and everything else was put into it. The program was put into it, essentially. That's true.
I just had to, because
No,
nobody
it's
else
really
would talk about this level.
It's a beautiful
of-
space.
Yeah, I love it.
What, to-
Yeah, I was gonna-
Okay, I'd just like to say that the quality of your voice, the tenor of your speaking is almost like dance to me. Your presentation, I don't know how prepared you were to say what you were going to say, but it has almost a melody to it, and it had no formality whatsoever. I never could anticipate what you were going to say next. It was almost like turning the page of a book or listening to a song. I just want to say to you that it was most pleasant to just hear you describe how you came to the genesis of the paintings, and I see that in the paintings too. I look at them, and I come in and out of this building all the time, and I look at them, and there's a certain, I always look at the green one first. I mean, it just draws me in a certain direction, there's a flow, and there's also that gentle, I don't know, uncovering that I feel, and I felt it with your presentation as well, so it seems to me that you actually, you have the capacity in everything that you do that produces a comfort and a mystery at the same time.
And we should give her the mic.
I would say.
Thank you very much.
Building on what Pam just said, I think the abstract quality is the incomplete part which the viewer completes.
She's recording. I just realized.
I would say that, impressionist painting, such as what you have, is the abstract piece that the viewer completes, which is why when you look at it, you're in some way completing the painting by being drawn into it, involved with it. It isn't like formalistic painting like would do, right? If it isn't salon, right? It's bringing you into the work. It's when the first impressionists broke off. And suddenly the painting wasn't salon painting anymore. It was involving the viewer into the painting. That's what you're describing, I think. Anyway.
And I think you had one more. Somebody.
Yeah,
And then-
it was a question of, I haven't gotten to look at the paintings yet. We were out of town, but I will right afterwards. Maybe that'll answer the question. But it seems like when you create a work of art, you're always oscillating in a sense between more abstract and more realism. And I'm wondering if you find yourself starting with one plan and ending up more abstracted than you had started out, or even the other way around.
I so want to be able to do abstract work and then, you know that thing about where the knife thrower can't kill his wife even though he wants to because he's so experienced at going around the body and he can't. That's how I feel with abstraction. I just feel like I get so close and then because I trained up in realism, it keeps dragging me back. And I just can't seem to let go and keep following into that abstract realm without it just being, I don't want it to be a hurried sketch. I want it to have texture and layering, but it seems like I keep finding my way back. The more I start layering things in, it gets too realistic. So it's an interesting question, an interesting point.
I think, personally, I think abstract paintings are a lot more interesting because the realistic painters and the realism painting, you might as well take a photograph, really. And an abstract painting is realistically the way things are, because things aren't perfect. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, if you stop interpreting it and you just look at just the shapes and the colors and without saying, I've had this experience a few times when I would be in very deep Sufi meditation with my teacher, not on my own, but I would be in this sort of deep sleep. He would put us all to sleep. We'd all be like gone, after doing all this movement. And there'd be this moment when I would open my eyes and I really did not shape everything into the world that I know. I just opened my eyes and saw whatever I just didn't interpret it. I didn't know what it was. So I didn't know it was a room with another body laying beside me. It was just abstract material. I so loved that moment. It never lasted very long. So maybe that's why I want to make my way over to, I just want to have the experience of doing it to see if that is something for me. So maybe I'm working my way over there. We'll see. Now, I don't know if we have the time limit on.
Well, we can decide, precedent is that we can go to 8:15. But we can break rules too,
Okay.
or we could break and say, let's eat and chat, but I'm in.
If you've been
How does
sitting
one
long
decide?
enough.
It just naturally end when there's no more questions?
I had a question.
Comments?
We don't go with names.
That's what I want.
What'd you say?
You mentioned you went,
I'd like to go.
when you were in Australia in the evening time, and you went to a dance and you saw, what was the name of that dancing that they did?
It's called Bharatnatyam.
What is it called?
Bharatnatyam. It's a kind of, there's Odissi, there's a few different Kathak. There are about 3 different long traditions of Indian classical dance. Bharatnatyam is the one.
Okay. I was in Bali in 1990, and I think that's what I saw, but it was so long ago I forget what they called it, but it was just so different. The jerky movements and the costume and, yeah.
It's
never
usually
forget that we
it's
see.
usually a solo dancer and then like a small number of musicians, like 3 or so. I don't know if that's what you saw. And usually a very elaborate
Oh,
costume.
very elaborate.
And then there's this sort of a lot of stepping of going across and then these gestures that are telling the story.
Right. They were definitely telling a story.
Yeah, and that's Bharatnatyam. That's Bharatnatyam.
It was so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice?
Well, I did bring a few things to munch on, if anybody wants to eat a little bit.